The Nerd Initiative presents the Comic Press Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Comic Press Podcast. I'm your host, JJ, with the hoodie that matches the screen behind him. And today I've got a very special guest in store for you guys. We've got editor of Scout Comics and writer for Road Trip to Hell. Please welcome Nicole D'Andria. What's going on?
Hey, Jeremy. Not much. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
Good. I'm good. I'm glad we could get you back on here. I know last time it was kind of a little bit of chaos. We had Marcuson and Steve on here. So
Fun chaos. Always fun chaos.
oh yeah, it was a great time, but it was kind of all over the place at times. We didn't get to get a whole lot of detail out of everybody, you know.
Yeah.
So given that, before we get into everything, let's go ahead and get your nerd origin story for folks, because I know we went over it briefly last time, but we're trying to squeeze everything into an hour with 3 guests, and it was kind of a lot. So
Abbreviated, or that was the
abbreviated. So go ahead and give us some detail.
Sure. So I think I mentioned, that it was my 15th birthday. I had read comics a little bit before that point, but I had never been like super into them. Like I was into nerdy stuff, but not quite at comic book level yet.
Right.
And for my 15th birthday, my mom actually surprised me with a trip to a sci-fi mega fest because I wanted to meet James Marsters. I was, a teenager who loved James Marsters, Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh yeah.
People know that. I hope people still remember him. He's amazing. And a bunch of other things. But so she surprised me with that trip. And of course, at this convention, I discovered like a $1 box of comics, which, having no idea anything about comics, really, I was like, oh, they're only $1. I was like so
Right.
excited. I was very frugal. So I was like, this is awesome. Of course, got a bunch of Batman stuff, but brought those home. That was kind of my first real experience, like with a chunk of comics. And then, and I realized it's funny because that didn't even really spark my interest until I realized I had comics from an art class that I took years ago, which went nowhere, if you can't tell, since I'm just the writer, editor, not artist. But I did take art classes for a while, and the guy was a huge comic fan, and he had these little auctions he would do during classes where he'd auction off comic books with like play money that you could earn in the art class. It was really clever.
I feel like we had the same art teacher. I had a drawing teacher my freshman year of high school named Mr. Kopp, and he did the same thing. He had our first project was we had to do 1 page of a comic book.
That's amazing. Yeah, I would not have been able to do that.
Oh no, mine looked horrible. I still can't draw. My mother and my grandfather can both draw and paint, and it skipped me.
It skips a generation. But yeah, so I looked through what I had from that because I'd never, for whatever reason, I'd never thought to read through them. I guess I was just too young at that point. And I found an issue of Alpha Flight back when John Byrne was writing it, and absolutely loved it. And it was at that point I started looking into where I could go to conventions to start getting more of this stuff. And I just looked out that there were a lot of like hotels nearby that were doing like little mini conventions where it was like,
those are the best sometimes.
Love those. Growing up, oh my God, I bought too many comics growing up because my mom was an enabler. I love her, but she was definitely spoiled me with that. And there was a lot of dollar comic boxes that I found. So I got a lot of Alpha Flight, and then that just kind of shot into every direction. I started like collecting, like viciously collecting. Like I had so many in such a short period of time. And it was funny because I feel like I would usually, growing up, when you get into something and you get into it really quickly, so you're like really passionate about it for like a couple months, but then it kind of teeters off.
Yeah, you kind of find something else, or
Yeah. In this case, I think part of why I was lucky was around the same time I started collecting was I was looking online at these, pop culture sites that would write reviews and stuff. And I'd always wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. And I found this site way back then. It was like called Player Affinity. And I applied there to be like a comic book reviewer. So I ended up getting picked up for that. And it had to be like, it was something I had to stick to, because at this point, not just collecting it, but, I'm writing reviews and news stories and stuff. And, I think I ended up at that. I think I was at that place for a very decent chunk of time. And it was a great way to like network with creators eventually. I did interviews with people, and it's sort of like all led up to me finding my way into the comic book industry finally. So,
That is so weird because, like, seriously, like, that's almost of course, I'm not working in the industry or whatever, but it, like, I started writing reviews for Nerd Initiative, which turned into this, which, it just keeps going.
it snowballs in the best
Yeah,
way. Yeah.
exactly, but it's funny how, like, you accidentally turn a hobby into, like, a job or a career path.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I knew since I was young, I knew I really wanted to, whatever job I wanted to have, I wanted to make sure I was really passionate about it. So that was a big must for me.
Right, but, I mean, this nerd industry, I guess you could call it, is not there's not a lot of, like, how to enter the industry kinda information out there.
Yeah.
So, was yours you just, like, literally just said, "I'm just gonna apply and see what happens," or
It was funny. It not just apply, but it was at the time I had interviewed a few creators, so I knew a couple people like in the industry. And I believe at that time I had to for college. I was in college by that point. Yeah, I was in college at that point, and I needed to find an internship. And I had a couple of these contacts, so I applied to a couple places, but I just started asking people, like even if there weren't applications, I was like, "Do you know somebody in this publishing company? Are they looking for anyone? Will I take any
Right.
intern? Like, please, because my
Like, "I'll
experience
get the
was."
coffee, I'll"
Yeah, yeah. And I ended up lucking out, in a way, because it was at that time, I was talking with Jeremy Whitley, who, is, most people know him for, Princeless. He did Unstoppable Wasp for Marvel, and at the time, it was at Action Lab, which is it's very weird to say that name now because I think that, the narrative for them has definitely changed over the years, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
unfortunately, because they do still put out some good stuff.
yeah, but at the time, this was in I want to say this was back in 2015. So they
Mm.
were not too old. I think it was only a couple years. I might be misremembering, but a couple years old. And I ended up getting a contact through Jeremy. I was able to meet people there who ended up taking me on as an intern. And I mean, despite everything, like the internship itself was really good because they allowed me to do like pretty much anything. Like I was doing editing, I was doing some marketing stuff, I was doing eventually submission stuff. I was able to get experience in a lot of different fields within the comic book industry. And I'm really proud of the stuff I was able to edit for them. I was always a freelancer, and eventually, just it got to the point, unfortunately, with that company with communication and just a bunch of other things going on. And a lot of people who really good people who were there who left, and it got to the point where during the pandemic especially, where it just wasn't it was definitely a leap, but it wasn't feasible for me to really want to stay there anymore.
Right.
Unfortunately, I got like I was there for like 5 years, always as a freelancer, mostly doing editing and stuff like that. But I was getting bogged down with all this other stuff, and it was so hard to like get communication, unfortunately, at the time. And I just didn't feel I wanted to. I think I stayed longer than I probably should have there, honestly, because
The kinda
I really
loyalty, like, "They gave me my start, I don't wanna
yeah, they gave me
leave,"
my
like
start, and, I really wanted to help people who were there because there was, like, this communication thing, and I was like, "Well, maybe if I just keep sending emails or I keep calling people, maybe I can get, like, more things moving." And it just got to the point where, I just had to move on and see what else I could do, which, it was definitely, really scary at the time because I think I put a lot of my identity into the company, and I sort
Yeah.
of yeah, I had to move on from that and make sure that I could stand on my own 2 feet, and I knew a lot of really good people, before and after my time there. So, thankfully, shortly after I left there, I was able to find several actually places to freelance, including, I do a lot of editing for independent creators now too, but the main one we're talking about tonight is, Scout Comics.
Mhm.
editing a lot of stuff for them, doing some project
You've edited a
management.
lot of stuff from them.
I have a lot of really good books. Like I know last time I was on here with if By the Horns. I don't think we
Mhm.
even mentioned that yet, but yeah, I was on here with the By the Horns guys who I met through, when they were at Action Lab doing
Right.
their other book, Voracious. So, there was a
I remember
connection there.
Marcus saying something about that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, and let me know if I'm going off on a tangent.
No,
'Cause
go
I
ahead.
I barely remember the question at this point you asked. But it was funny because the reason that I was able to, find Scout was because, one of the people there reached out to me, Andrea, who's really awesome editor.
I
Uh,
love him.
he's amazing.
He
Um
was just on the show not too long ago with Charles Chester.
oh, yeah, okay,
I
awesome,
just had
yeah.
them on the other day.
Nice, nice. And he reached out to me actually and was asking me if I was looking for work, and it happened to be like a month or two after I left Action Lab, I think. And he reached out to me because he worked as an editor on, I think it was Blood Samurai, which was
Mhm.
also at Action Lab, and I had done a bit of editing with him on that book when I was there, and it was a really weird connection that we ended up making there, but it led to this opportunity at Scout where I'm editing a few books for them now. I did editing on a mini series they did, Cult of Icarus, that they had out, Impossible Jones, and then I know
I
some of
was
the
gonna say I've got a
upcoming. Yeah,
list here. Like
yeah, and some of the upcoming ones. So I transitioned to that. I did, and it was nice because I was able to focus more on editing, which is like my main passion, not just like marketing submissions, but I was able to focus more on editing and then writing my own stuff. And then yeah, I joined a couple other companies along the way too. Like I still do freelancing for like Tapas Media, J Novel, bunch of places. So it's been really nice to kind of like diversify where I'm working but still focus on the stuff I love doing, specifically the editing and the writing side of the industry.
Yeah, no, when I was doing research before this interview, I noticed the work you were doing for J Novel. You did Culinary Chronicles of the Court of Flower. And what was funny about that is I was in my brother's room the other day helping him do something, I forget, and I was looking through his manga collection and he's got like 4 issues of that.
Really? I didn't know did they actually put that out physically? Because I figured it was just digital at this point.
I seen like I don't know where he got them. He may have found them like in the back shelf somewhere at a store, or he might have gotten them offline. I don't know where he got them, but he's got like 3 or 4 of
That's hysterical. I love that.
them. But so editing, what drew you specifically to editing that made that your like thing you really like to do?
I think it was I mean, my first love growing up was definitely writing, and I think it wasn't a big leap for me to go from writing to editing, because it was really interesting to be able to read something, that somebody else wrote and to be able to have input with something that they created because I know
Mhm.
how precious things that I create are to me. So it's kind of like it's an honor really to be able to, make suggestions on someone else's baby basically
Right.
and try to make it even better than it already is. So it was just a really fun process.
And then kinda elaborate, because I know that's one thing I wanted to have you on the show to talk about is the editing process itself, because I know a lot of people probably, see that editor credit on a comic book, and they probably assume, "Oh, they made sure everything was spelled right." And
I mean,
I
that's
mean,
part of it,
obviously,
to
I'm
be
not
fair.
super educated on the subject either, but I know there's gotta be more to it than just spell checking.
Yes, there's definitely more to it than just, proofreading. That's of course a really important element. I feel like I wish I could remember who said it, but I know somebody has said like the best editing is the editing you don't notice. So like when you edit enough, not just for spelling and grammar and things like that, but just to maybe help a sequence flow. Like I know some things I do sometimes is I'll make like a one pager after I read through a script to kind of comment on various things or do in depth comments that, talk about things like, oh, is your dialogue flowing naturally? Does it feel too stilted? Do you need to maybe reword it? Maybe even read it aloud sometimes to get a feel for how it really sounds. and focus on things like big things too, like pacing. Like, does this make sense? I know a big one is, are you cramming a page with too many panels to the point where, if the artist draws it, you're not going to have enough space for everything you're describing? Because it's very easy to put down something like 10 panels on a page and write all this description. But then when you have the artist go and draw it, you have to make sure that it's physically possible to like put it all on the page without it becoming cramped, and also keeping in mind, things like spacing for the lettering and stuff like that. Because if you don't have enough room and you have this panel planned and it turns out to be a really small panel, but then you have this much dialogue going into it, it's not going to translate properly. So it's those things that you have to pick up on and make comments about.
Yeah, because I remember that was actually something that Andre spoke on. He was what series was it that he talked about? I can't remember, but he was saying something about the fact that when he goes in to like edit a story, you can definitely 100% tell when the artist or the writer on the book tried to letter it themselves,
Mhm,
because everything will either be really squished together because they're trying to fit too much in,
mhm.
thinking that they're Jack Kirby or Stan Lee, or they're they just don't know how to like really structure it on the page to show off everything and not clutter it.
Right.
So is that something that you can tell definitely, like, when it's like, okay, this is a person that doesn't know what they're doing and they need help, or is that not as obvious sometimes?
I mean, there's like the more egregious examples, I feel like you can spot pretty quickly. And I think, even if you're not a newcomer to comics, because I've worked with everyone from like someone who's doing their first comic book project to someone who's done hundreds of projects before. And, regardless of skill level, it's always important to check for stuff like that, because it's easy to like to maybe overthink something. I know I do that a lot. But it can be easy to overthink something, or think about it in a different way that you're not used to. And maybe you're thinking like, I have this scene planned out in my head, and on the page, three panels are all going to be equal size. It's going to be, and sometimes it just doesn't translate, between the script to the artist and letterer. So you try to catch that stuff when you're an editor looking at a script. Though that said, it doesn't always happen, because sometimes the artist has their own vision in their head, which ironically, that's another thing I try to pick up on in editing, which is that, they're leaving enough room for the artist to still be creative and not dictating too much, because it's definitely a give and take in that process. It's really important, to get the idea across, but also not to like stilt the process or stunt the process with the artists, and give them room to be creative too. And usually, sometimes you can't always tell when it'll be too much dialogue in a panel or not. So sometimes, when you get to that stage where you have the art and you're onto the letters and you're like, oh, I really can't fit that much dialogue in this panel. Sometimes you have to do editing at that point and figure out, well, can I cut this down? Can I do it in multiple balloons? Can I maybe add this to another panel? In a perfect world, you wouldn't have to do any editing at that point. But honestly, that's something that comes up. And you usually can still work with it when you have like a good story with a good flow going. You can usually rearrange it just enough to still make it feel natural. But it can get a bit trickier at that point.
Right, because I mean, I've read some stuff that sounds like really bad 90s sitcom television, or not sitcom, but like soap opera stuff, like just
I enjoy that stuff
horrible
sometimes.
dialogue. But I've read some horrible dialogue in some books. But let's get into your book that you wanted to talk about. This was a lot of fun for me to read. When I read through these,
Thank
I'm
you.
like, there's only 3? You only sent me 3? Like,
I'm sorry. I'm
no, you're
working on it.
fine.
Working on more.
But guys, Road Trip to Hell. This series is off the wall, and I love it. I love every second of it. Can you give everybody a brief synopsis of this story? Because from the covers alone, I'm sure everybody's like, what in the world is going on here?
Yeah, sure. So, Road Trip to Hell is basically this guy who finds out that his father is actually the devil, and the devil has died and left him as the new king of hell, which, and has left all his powers and things to him, which would be great, except the only way that he gets to have all of that is if he literally goes to hell. And the other problem he faces is that everyone from hell, since, the devil's no longer there to guard it, everyone from hell has escaped. And if they kill Francis, the main character, if they kill him, then they get to become king of hell. So a bunch of basically historical figures like Adolf Hitler, Attila the Hun, all those people are coming after Francis and trying to kill him so that they can get the right to the throne.
Which is just an insane plot in and of itself. But then the way you guys tell the story, it's actually crazy because, Francis, he's adopted. He doesn't know he didn't know the devil was his father. He gets visited in his sleep, basically. He's got this, I guess you would call it a psychic power that he can see the future.
Yes, though of course, I'm really not kind to him. I always make it like he can see the future, but it's only like if something really bad is about to happen to you. So he sees a lot of really messed up stuff.
Yeah, like poor surfer dude getting
Yeah.
his arm ripped off. Although, do you really feel bad for the surfer guy at that point?
Aw, come on. Ugh.
No, but it's so much fun. Like, what inspired this story? Like, is this something you already had in your head, or is this something you kind of developed over time?
Well, I've always really liked that whole argument of nature versus nurture. I took too many psych classes when I was in high school, and then going into college. It's interesting because I distinctly remember, going from high school psychology to college psychology. The one big thing they taught us that seemed to change between the grade levels, like because it was still developing over time, was the whole nature versus nurture argument. Because it used to be, when I was in high school, it was more so taught like, oh, it's always going to be your nurture. Nature doesn't really affect it that much. It's nurture. It's how you're raised. But then when I was in college, it was more of like, oh, it's nurture mainly, but the nature can influence certain factors in your life. It can have a very important impact on you. So I think I kind of internalized that, and I always thought it was really interesting. And I had that thought, ironically, when I was watching, it's not memorable, I'm sorry. They made a Rosemary's Baby like 2-part mini series that came
I
out
think
when
I
I was in
vaguely remember this.
college. Yes, it came out when I was in college, and I was watching it with my roommate. And do you care if I spoil Rosemary's Baby? I feel like people should probably know by now.
I mean, if we really, really want to be worried about it, we can, go ahead and throw a spoiler warning up.
But yeah, so basically at the end, like, she has basically like the devil's baby or whatever. And, in my head, I was like, I always thought the idea of like, oh, if you had somebody who is like related to like one of the worst people ever, like straight up the devil, um, would people like write you off, like think you're evil immediately? And in my optimistic head at the time, I was like, oh, I don't think I could write a story about that, because I feel like everybody would be like, oh, it's nurture. The kid, if he's raised right, he'll be fine. It doesn't matter that he's the devil. And I ended up getting into an argument with my roommate, a friendly argument because we're very close. But we were watching Rosemary's Baby together, and I like was telling her that, and she was like, no, he'd be evil. There's no way he'd be good. He's evil. Just kill him now. Just kill the baby now. It's not gonna happen. And I was like, that's awful. And now I want to write this because I want to prove, well, not necessarily prove, but I want to show that argument where
Right.
he could go either way. Like, I'm honestly not even going to say in the case of Road Trip to Hell, because you see hints of Francis fighting his nature versus his
You
nurture, because it
definitely
seems,
do, because when you see him with his sister, he's, joking around, he's happy, he's laughing with her. They even joke about him being adopted. And then, when he's getting fired, you can definitely see that the little bit of devil that's in him. You could definitely tell.
yes, and that's something I really want to play with throughout the series, because you can see, Star, his sister, you can see that she's definitely like the good side of him. She brings out the best side of Francis because they grew up together. And I won't say too much about how they grew up, but that's something I want to reveal in future volumes is kind of, with the nature versus nurture argument. I want to show how they grew up together and what their life was like to show more of the nurture for him. But yeah, you definitely see like a darker side of Francis that he seems to be fighting against. And this whole situation that he gets thrown in is just going to put him to the ultimate test, whether he's ready or not. So,
Oh yeah, because I mean, even at the end of the notice for, him inheriting hell, his I guess, yeah, his father says, "Have fun." Like, like, because he's basically sicked all the demons on him now without really knowing, like, not on purpose because, I'm sure the devil did not choose to be destroyed, but
yeah, it probably wasn't what he was planning for his Sunday afternoon, but
yeah, I would assume not. And then the random encounters with the, historical figures, I love it. First person you see is Genghis Khan. I mean, what a way to start that off.
yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. I did a lot of research when I was, starting out with the concept of this because immediately I was like, well, if I take all these horrible historical figures from hell, like I wanted to make sure they were all actual historical figures and like throw in like not history facts so much because I know people, you don't always want like a list of facts, but a way I can incorporate real historical facts into the story through these characters, which was just it was so much fun to do. Though I did worry that they thought I was I was worried they were gonna like judge me really hard because I was writing this. I started writing it when I was in college, so I was doing all this research at the library and taking out all these books. So I was taking out like all these books about Nazis and serial killers, and then also religious texts because I wanted to look at some of like the Bible and things like that. So I was
Yeah.
taking these out at like the same time, and I was like, I wonder if they ever like look at people's history of what they've taken out and if they ever judge people because I feel very judged.
Wonder if they put you on, like, some kinda list at the
Watch
school.
this.
Like we might wanna watch out for this one. No,
Yeah,
and
it
it
was
does.
a
It
lot of
just
fun.
gets better and better, though. I mean, Joan
Thank
of
you.
Arc shows up and just completely trounces Francis. Like
Yeah. Oh, she was so much fun to write. And, I hesitated too. It's funny because originally I had somebody else kind of in that role because I really wanted to write swordswoman Joan of Arc, but I felt like everybody does that. But at the same time, it's like everybody does that because it's really cool and really fun.
Right.
And you can still do a lot with the character. So I really wanted to, add her in there. And I'm hoping, in future arcs to explore more of her backstory too, based on, the historical facts of her life.
No, that's really cool because, like, with all like, people read a comic book, you don't really expect to learn anything necessarily when you open a comic book, but you will with this series. I mean, it might not be, like, super detailed, like you said, it's not a textbook, it's not the History Channel or anything. Well, History Channel back when it was good, but before it
Shots
was all
fired at
just
the History
reality
Channel.
shows. But no, I mean, you even drew in, like, some of the horrible things that, like, people like Heinrich Himmler did, like, and managed to incorporate it into the story well without making it, like, the main plot or anything.
Thank you. It was really important to me to try to work all the historical, hints at the historical truth of it all into it in a natural way. I didn't want it to come off like I'm trying to teach you something. I wanted it to be a fun way to like learn something and also enjoy the story as a whole.
Right? Because you mentioned, like, his obsession with twins and how, all that stuff, and it's like,
Oh, Mengele, yeah. Yeah.
that's pretty accurate, like
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
So, like, and as, like, a fan of, like, history documentaries and stuff, I appreciate when I see something like that and I actually see the research done, like, okay, this person actually put some effort into this, even if some of these characters don't last very long.
And don't get me wrong, I do want to take like some liberties with it too, because I feel like if I follow too closely to the history, like it allows for some surprises otherwise. Because like I think it's interesting to think of like, okay, these are the historical figures you might have learned about in school or through books and things like that. But now just imagine they've been in hell for a while and have maybe learned a thing or two there that maybe changed them as people that I kind of want to throw in there.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't have any photos from issue 2 or anything or issue 3, but Is Ava Braun.
Oh, that was fun.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Mhm.
That was probably like one of my favorite scenes in the first 3 issues was
Oh,
her
gosh,
just
yeah.
popping up out of nowhere, and I was like because it kinda puts a thought in your head like, "Ooh, was that her, like, secret plan originally, and then she just
Right,
didn't get
yeah.
the chance to do it?" Or No, this series is a lot of fun, and anybody who is listening or watching to this after it's been recorded, you need to go and check it out, and you can do so right there, QR code on the screen. All you gotta do is hold your phone up, scan that sucker, and it'll take you straight to where you can buy issue 1.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the promotion a lot.
Oh, I mean, that's why I bring people on here because not enough indie stuff gets the love. Everybody's talking about Marvel. Everybody's talking about DC. I love Marvel. I love DC. But once in a while, you get sick of superheroes and you want something different. And that's why I like having indie people on here because, and especially people like you, like we got to learn stuff about editing today. We got to, like, and that was a pretty good deep dive. Like, and I mean, and people are going to get a new series to dive into now too.
I hope so, please. Please check it out.
Because this is your first creator owned, right?
Yes, yeah, because I've done adaptation work in the past, which has been a lot of fun. Like I've taken episodes from the show Miraculous, Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir, Peter David's Artful, that kind of stuff I've translated to comics, and it's definitely very fulfilling, but it's a very different process when you take like adaptation work because it's basically like you're playing in someone else's sandbox, which
Mhm.
can be really fun because you want to try to adapt what you've seen on TV or in a book, and it can provide an interesting challenge, and you really want to do those characters justice. But when you get your own creator owned work, it's like you've bought your own sandbox. You get to do whatever you want with it, so it's a lot of fun.
And I'm sure, I mean, with your good relationship with Scout, I'm sure that wasn't a hard sell for them. I mean, they love this kinda stuff, it seems like.
Yes. I mean, I'd like to think even, even though I freelance for them, I'd like to think that, they genuinely seem to see something there. They seem very excited about it. So I was really happy when they were able to pick it up.
Well, and from the things I read, and like this is a reason some of you might have noticed, there's been a lot of Scout Comics creators on lately. I'm a huge fan of the publisher. I discovered you guys during the pandemic, so I was like, "Oh, this is different. This is new," you know. And it was my little local comic shop here in Columbus. Shout out Laughing Ogre Comics. Like they had it on the shelf, and the first one from you guys I found was the Corset
Oh, nice. That's a good
from
one.
Yuri Kiernev, who I've also had on the show now.
Yes.
He's a trip. But no, is there anything else that you're working on right now? I know you said you're working on more issues of Road Trip to Hell, but is there any other projects that you're like thinking about writing for in the future that you've got in the on the back burner, or is there something that you're really excited about that you're editing right now? Or
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely still working on Road Trip to Hell. That's coming along slowly but surely. I There's another project, I have a few in the back of my mind that I'd like to do, but I know I need to mostly focus on Road Trip to Hell right now. One that I'd love to do more with, and maybe if I just start talking about it, it'll make me have to like materialize it. But it was actually I did a short. It was a couple years ago now for Nightmare Theater Anthology.
Mm.
They've done a couple of really good anthologies now, and I had a short in their first anthology called "The Kill Boat," and it was basically if Hostel met the Love Boat.
Oh,
And
wow,
yeah,
okay.
and it was only like six or so pages, but it kind of just introduces that concept, and I'd
Mhm.
really like to take that and make it into like an original graphic novel or something like that. Like that's probably what I'd like to work on next. If not, I'd probably end up having to do it while Road Trip to Hell is still going because I have several arcs in mind for that because I did what you're not supposed to do, which is your first creator-owned work being really, really long, which you're supposed to try to find like a good
Like a nice little 5-issue story you can
5,
do,
4,
maybe
get it
even a
out
one
there.
shot, like
No, I'm like, I can picture 6 arcs, 3 issues each. It's only 18 issues. That's not.
Hey, I'm here for it though. If it's anything like the first 3 issues I've gotten to read so far, it'll be great.
Well, thank you for that. So I don't, I don't know how long that'll take me, but my hope is that, while I'm working on the next arc of that, maybe after I finish this next arc, I could start thinking more about stuff like the Kill Boat. And, I'm editing a lot of stuff right now I'm really happy about. I mean, the Culinary Chronicles you just brought up. I was really proud of that because that recently ended, and that was an 11-volume light novel series. So I was
Mhm.
working on that for over 2 years. So that felt like it felt like an accomplishment to me. I like to think
Oh,
so.
yeah, that's a long-term project. I mean, shoot.
Yeah, so it was really fulfilling. So that was like a big one that just ended recently, and I'm doing a couple web comics for Tapas Media. So things like Come Down Machine, which is in between seasons right now. Romantic drama, all that good stuff. And then what else? I mean, with Scout, we have a couple of really good ones coming out soon. Are going to be Howie the Hellhound, which I think is adorable. It's like a dramedy, very much up my alley. If you couldn't tell from Merch of Hell,
Right.
but yeah, basically a hellhound escaping from hell, and then meeting Louise, who's the struggling actress, and them kind of having that immediate like a dog parent bond kind of thing. So it's a really sweet story. You wouldn't imagine how sweet it could be, but it's very sweet. And then Mom Breaks the Internet, which I feel like, it's thrilling. It's very political. So I feel like, it'll definitely create a lot of discussion, which I think is really important. So I'm very
I would
excited for
say as
both of
much as
those.
some comic fans don't want to
I
have
know.
serious talks.
It's very important topics, and I feel like the characters are like characters you can really connect with. So I'm hoping that people really enjoy that one and that it starts a lot of conversations.
Yeah, and another one I noticed that you worked on, just as a fun comment real quick, was She Bites.
Yeah,
I didn't realize you worked on that. I had,
so fun.
Hedwig on the show. Is she like that is one of the best stories I've read in such a long time. Like
I love dark comedy, so some of the jokes in that are just fantastic.
Oh, it's great.
Fantastic, as you say in
It's
that.
great. Definitely
Yeah.
not, dinner table appropriate, I would say, but
It depends on what kind of dinner table you have. You never know.
that's very true. That's very true. I wouldn't take it to, like, your elderly grandmother's house, stuff like that. Unless she's into that kinda thing, you never know.
I did get my grandmother into True Blood, so there's that. But
I I feel like there might have been other contributing factors to that, though. True Blood's one of those series, like, "You like you like those
like
vampires."
that.
No, but that's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, is there anything else you wanna plug before we get out of here?
Oh
I
god.
wanna make sure everybody gets all their stuff in, man.
Oh god, I feel like I'm working on like several things right now. Several. I know some upcoming projects. I think some independent creators. I should shout them out for sure. I know. Oh, Blake. I think his Kickstarter. I think is still running for Territory. It's like post-apocalyptic kaiju stuff. I definitely recommend checking that out. That I
Mm.
edited. Um, Another one that's coming up. I think the Kickstarter is launching for that next week. Is Robert's Turner Family Terrors. I think that's issue 4 of that. It's like a pretty much like a family of monster hunters, and it has that a more mature comedy feel to it, and it's a lot of fun. So those are like kind of 2 recent Kickstarters I can like think of for some indie stuff. um and I'm not sure how much longer it's going to be, but he did do an update about it. The guy who's doing Eric Anderson, who's doing Salty Roos, which
Mm.
it's basically anthropomorphic kangaroos who are into extreme sports and solve mysteries, kind of like Scooby Doo meets Rocket
I
Power.
was
If anyone
just about
remembers
to say
Rocket
that.
Power, I don't know if people remember that, but yes,
Oh,
yes,
I love
um,
Rocket Power. Are you kidding me?
yes,
I'm a kid of the '90s, so that was my jam when I was little.
awesome, awesome. But yeah, it's definitely like that. I'm not sure when the Kickstarter is for that, but the next one he announced is going to be like 4 issues. I've been editing that series since the beginning, and I actually got to write 2 of the issues that are going to be in the next Kickstarter, which is very very fun because he gives us basically topics and then we get to go nuts with it. So it's very nice because I got to write more vampire stuff. and then a space thing. So you get like kind of like Star Wars in one issue, and then you get not quite. I don't want to compare it to True Blood. Never mind. But you get vampires, not those kind of vampires, and not the sparkle kind either. But you get vampires. So
Yeah, no twinkly going on here.
And I feel bad because I'm sure I'm forgetting something or I really want to mention more. But like I usually have a current list of not just a current list, but I have a list of all the stuff I've worked on my website. So like comicmaven.com, all my stuff's on there. And you can join
you can find that link at the bottom of your screen right there.
You just have that ready to go. That's perfect.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and I have a link to like my newsletter on there too, which I do every couple months. I try to put out a newsletter that just kind of goes through all the stuff I've been working on, the stuff that's coming out or soon to come out. And that includes everything from like the Scout stuff to the stuff that's on Kickstarter only. So you get a little bit of everything there. And that way I feel like I'm not leaving someone out because I feel bad.
Well, there you go. And don't feel bad because I don't blame you for missing a couple of people because you do so much. So
I try.
But everybody, please make sure go over to scoutcomics.com and search up Road to Hell from Nicole D'Andria. You can also go ahead and scan that QR code. If you don't feel like typing it in, you want to save that extra 10 seconds, you can go ahead and just scan the code. It'll take you straight to the purchase page. Also, before we get out of here, I do have to make quick announcements. The next episode of the Comic Press is going to be on October 6th at 6 p.m. Next episode of Fandoms is going to be September 19th. And then we've got Wrestling Night Live, the new pro wrestling show. That is September 27th at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then our newest comic book show, Turn a Page. They cover everything from indie stuff to Marvel and DC. That's going to be September 26th at 8 p.m. And new comic book day reviews are available each and every single week on nerdinitiative.com/comic-books. And that's via the Nerd Initiative bullpen. Whew, got it all out. My name is Jeremy. Thank you very much, Nicole, for hanging out with me and coming on the show, because if you guys don't come on and talk to me, I don't have a show to do. So with that, everybody, please be safe, be kind, and take it easy.